Imagine yourself hurled back through time, landing in the year 1187, staring directly into the eyes of a Crusader knight fully armed for war. You've got your modern protein shakes, your sleek gym membership card, maybe even brag about doing CrossFit a few times a week. You feel tough, maybe even unstoppable. Quick question before we dive deeper. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments so we can see how many different places in the world are joining this journey into the past. But the harsh reality? You wouldn't stand a chance. You're about to realize in the most brutal way possible just how laughably wrong that assumption really is. The truth is simple. A Crusader knight wouldn't just beat you. He'd obliterate you so completely that historians digging through the wreckage of your defeat would struggle to find enough pieces left to write a footnote about you. So let's strip away the Hollywood myths and paint the picture of what these warriors truly were. Because chances are, everything you think you know is completely backwards. These men weren't just wealthy landowners who happened to have shiny armor and a warhorse. They were the forged result of one of the harshest, most unforgiving, and meticulously designed combat training systems the world has ever seen. This system didn't just churn out fighters. It created human weapons, men whose physical ability and mental toughness would make today's elite special forces look more like weekend hobbyists than hardened warriors. And it all began frighteningly young. At just 7 years old, when modern kids are still struggling to master shoelaces, a medieval boy destined for knighthood was already being molded into a weapon of flesh and steel. The training started with the basics. As pages, they learned not only how to read and write, but how to care for warhorses, wield wooden practice swords, and drill the foundations of combat every single day. No holidays, no time off, no excuses. Their childhood was discipline, duty, and preparation. Then came the age of 14, the brutal turning point. They became squires and life got deadly serious. The conditioning alone would leave most modern athletes hospitalized. They hauled enormous stone blocks for strength. They hurled javelins deliberately weighted heavier than battlefield weapons, forcing their bodies to grow stronger than the fight required. They wrestled for hours, sometimes until sheer exhaustion dropped them to the dirt. And that was just the beginning. To be considered a complete knight, one had to master the 7 points of agility: horsemanship, swimming and diving, proficiency with multiple weapons, climbing, tournament combat, wrestling, fencing, long jumping, and yes, even dancing. Because in battle, footwork was not grace. It was survival. One slip, one clumsy misstep, and you were dead. And the feats these men performed almost defy belief. Take Jean Toulouse Manger, better known as Boucicaut, one of France's most legendary knights of the 14th and 15th centuries. Historical accounts describe him climbing up the underside of a ladder using only his hands while wearing 60 pounds of steel armor. 60 pounds of iron plates strapped across his body. Yet he could perform a stunt that would break most modern climbers even without gear. Archaeology and manuscripts back this up. Medieval illustrations consistently show knights vaulting onto horseback in full armor without so much as a hand up. No ladders, no assistance. Just raw functional strength. Modern research has found that their fitness levels were on par with today's professional footballers or tennis players, with one critical difference. These men carried the equivalent of a small child, made entirely of steel, strapped to their bodies every waking moment on the battlefield. And here's where so many modern misconceptions fall apart. We've been taught by movies and pop culture that medieval armor was clunky, suffocating, and unbearably heavy. But that's a lie. A full suit of properly forged plate armor weighed between 33 and 55 pounds, lighter than the packs modern soldiers carry, and its design distributed the load so perfectly that knights could sprint, roll, leap, and fight with shocking agility. But here's the terrifying catch. Studies in biomechanics have shown that wearing armor nearly doubled the body's energy cost. Walking burned 2.3 times more energy, running 1.9 times more. That means a knight wasn't just fighting his enemy. He was battling his own body's exhaustion every step of the way. And yet, they sustained this for hours on the battlefield. Your cardio routine at the gym doesn't even scratch the surface. And then, of course, there was the weapon training. Forget the elegant, choreographed duels Hollywood loves to show. Sword combat wasn't poetry. It wasn't noble dueling. It was ruthless, savage, and horrifyingly effective. A dance of steel designed not for spectacle, but for killing with maximum efficiency. Forensic archaeologists combing through medieval battlefields have uncovered a chilling truth. The skeletons of fallen warriors almost never show a single fatal blow. Instead, most bear the scars of repeated, savage injuries delivered before death finally claimed them. These weren't quick, merciful endings. Medieval combat was about grinding your enemy down, blow after blow, through ruthless technique, relentless conditioning, and raw physical superiority. Knights didn't just swing swords randomly, they drilled endlessly, repeating movements until every strike became second nature. Their training followed principles eerily similar to modern strength and conditioning programs: progressive overload, incremental resistance, calculated stress on the body. But while your gym routine might end with a sore muscle, theirs could end with your life. Mistakes weren't inconvenient, they were fatal, and the mental preparation was just as brutal. Contemporary accounts describe knights battling on even after suffering wounds that would put most modern fighters in a hospital. Fueled by adrenaline, hardened by endless training, and driven by a mindset that merged fury with discipline, they fought in a controlled frenzy modern combat sports can barely replicate. When these men rode to war, they weren't lone fighters. They were components of a terrifyingly efficient killing engine. Physics itself was their ally. Think of a cavalry charge. Mass multiplied by speed equals devastation. An armored knight thundering forward on a massive warhorse at 20 miles an hour. Lance fixed and braced, carried enough force to smash through shields, scatter formations, and obliterate enemy morale in seconds. Muslim chroniclers of the Crusades wrote with awe and dread about the devastating unity of Frankish knights. These weren't wild, chaotic charges. They were precision maneuvers, knights riding knee to knee in seamless wedges of flesh, steel, and muscle that tore through lines like a living battering ram. To soldiers on the receiving end, the sight alone was enough to break their courage before impact. And here's where it gets even darker. The knights' power wasn't just physical, it was psychological. From childhood, they were molded to see violence not as tragedy but as destiny. Battle was their calling, their purpose. Pain wasn't something to avoid, but something to endure, even glorify. Death itself wasn't a fear but a gateway to honor. You, with your modern world of comfort, safety, and caution, would be broken in spirit long before they broke your body. The moment that armored figure lowered his lance and charged, the sheer terror would paralyze you where you stood. Even hardened veterans of the Middle Ages were described freezing at the sight of a knightly charge. What chance would you, a modern civilian, truly have? And then there were the weapons, brutal realities far removed from Hollywood fantasy. The sword at a knight's side wasn't some flashy stage prop. It was the product of centuries of refinement, a perfectly balanced tool of destruction designed for maximum efficiency. Medieval long swords, though weighing just 2 to 4 pounds, were devastating in trained hands, moving as naturally as if they were extensions of the warrior's body. But the sword was only the beginning. Real medieval combat wasn't limited to elegant cuts and thrusts. It was a vicious blend. Slashing, stabbing, grappling, wrestling, and even smashing opponents with the weapon's pommel in brutal close combat. These combinations were drilled until instinctive, hardwired into the knight's nervous system so deeply that he could fight half-conscious, in agony, or even blind in the chaos of night battles. And don't fool yourself into thinking the sword was their only skill. Knights were masters across entire arsenals of weapons, trained to kill with terrifying adaptability, no matter what they held in their hands. Lances weren't just decorative poles, they were precision tools of mounted warfare. Maces existed for one purpose: to shatter armor and bone. Daggers served as the brutal finishing touch in the chaos of close quarters, and crossbows offered a deadly answer at range. Maybe you've seen a few flashy YouTube demonstrations of these medieval weapons. But what those videos can't capture is this. Knights spent decades, not months, not years, but decades, honing their mastery over every single one. And the real difference between them and us becomes glaring when you compare how they approach training, recovery, and pain. Modern athletes obsess over protein shakes, sleep cycles, ice baths, and injury prevention. Knights? They trained straight through torn muscles, fought with wounds that would hospitalize today's professionals, and pushed themselves until their tolerance for pain bordered on inhuman. Chroniclers tell us of warriors battling on with cracked ribs, shattered bones, and blood pouring from cuts so deep they'd put the average modern person into shock within minutes. This wasn't reckless courage or a simple rush of adrenaline. It was a deliberate, systematic conditioning of body and mind, a lifestyle designed to produce soldiers who could function at peak performance while their bodies were being torn apart. Your 21st century advantages, recovery science, biomechanics, gym supplements, all of it becomes irrelevant when matched against a man who's lived every waking hour preparing for one outcome: to kill another human being in close combat. And then there's speed. You might believe you're quick, but speed in medieval combat was something else entirely. These knights developed lightning-fast reflexes after years of dueling against other hardened fighters. They could read a shift in posture, catch a twitch in the eye, and counter before you even realized you'd made a mistake. Their reactions weren't thought out. They were instinct, embedded so deep they might as well have been muscle memory encoded in their very bones. Even if by some miracle you managed to strike, you'd be hitting armor engineered by master craftsmen. A moving fortress of steel designed to absorb impact and deflect blows. And here's where the psychological terror came in. Imagine hearing your weapon bounce harmlessly off a knight's plate while he closed the distance on you with deadly calm. That metallic ring wasn't just the sound of failure. It was the last sound many opponents ever heard before falling. The historical record leaves little room for comfort. Archaeological evidence from battlefields shows skeletons marked not by random slashes, but by chillingly precise strikes, blows designed to cripple, dismember, or kill with maximum efficiency and minimum wasted effort. Knights didn't lash out wildly. They executed combat as if it were equal parts science and art, each movement a carefully calculated expression of violence. And here's the humbling reality. The Crusader knights, as fearsome as they were, weren't even the ultimate peak. They're simply the most documented in Europe. Other military orders, the Knights Templar, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, all followed equally brutal regimens of training, producing warriors just as skilled and just as lethal. So the next time you walk out of the gym feeling strong, remember this. A 12-year-old boy, after just a few years as a squire, already carried combat instincts that would overwhelm most modern adults. And a fully trained knight? He represented the pinnacle of human conditioning, proof of what happens when survival itself depends on mastering the art of war. Against one of them, you wouldn't last seconds. Not because you're weak, but because the system that forged knights was terrifyingly efficient. It didn't just train men, it transformed them into living weapons. The gap between their capabilities and our modern civilian fitness isn't a difference, it's a chasm. Today, we've traded that kind of raw conditioning for technology, comfort, and medicine. And while that's a gain for humanity, it means we'll never truly match their brutal edge. So the next time someone claims people today are tougher than our ancestors, picture a Crusader knight, and be glad history has spared you from ever having to test that theory face to face. Now I want to know, if you had to train as a squire from childhood, do you think you'd have survived the brutal road to knighthood? Drop your answer in the comments. If you love exploring the raw realities of the past, the strength, the struggle, and the strange truths history left behind, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Vassal Truths, because here we dig deeper than the legends. We uncover the blood, sweat, and human cost behind the myths. And trust me, the next story will change the way you look at strength forever.